All this is Dr. Mubin Sayed from Drbeen.com. Welcome to one more session. Today we are going to talk about a very interesting topic. There is a supercomputer-based study. So it's not an in vivo study or in vitro observation. This is a supercomputer-based gene analysis of patients of COVID-19 and their bronchoalveolar lavage fluid. That is a fluid that we take out when we wash inside of the lungs. And that fluid has, of course, cells from the lungs as well. And the supercomputers have helped to figure out what genes are open in those cells to figure out what kind of disease pattern may be observed. So based on that, on the supercomputer study, the results researchers say is that the actual problem is a Bradykinin storm instead of a possibility of cytokine storm. Of course, this study does not say it conclusively that this is what it is, but they say that this is what we are seeing in terms of the gene expression. So there need to be more studies to look at this line of disease progress. So I thought it was very interesting. I looked at it, the study itself, quite an exhaustive study. What they had also done, which is very interesting, is not only they talked about the Bradykinin storm, they also talked about the clinical features that are present in COVID-19 patients and mapped them onto the Bradykinin storm to say, when the storm occurs for Bradykinin, here are the dysregulations or the pathologies that occur, and here are the resultant clinical symptoms that we see in the COVID-19 patients. So I think that this may be that there is Bradykinin storm plus cytokine storm. I think it is interesting to look at some of the drugs that they have offered to look deeper into their mechanism as well, but it is interesting to look at it together as well. So let's start our discussion. Welcome everyone, and let's do it. So first of all, I need some feedback from the cool beans here. This is our Dr. Bean's existing homepage. So if you see here, it is maybe not the best and most polished homepage, but this is our current homepage. And here is a new homepage that we are developing. And I wanted to bring our site to more of a black color theme. So this is the new site that you are looking at. So if you can give me a comment from your side that how do you feel about this homepage? And if you like, you can go to drbeen.com/home-new to actually look at it deployed as well. This picture is yet not ours. It is a Shutterstock stock image, which is not yet purchased. So the credit going to Shutterstock. We will soon purchase that and then put it here. I feel that there is one thing that is interesting for this picture, that she is looking other way. So when you look at this homepage hero area, this area, you would look at her eyes and just look outwards, and that would just eject the person out. So probably this image needs to be flipped around, or maybe a different image where the person is looking this way, so you can look here. So this is the new one. If you click on the try for free now, you would see that the free trial page is also changed. And we are now changing the rest of the site to look like this. So I would really appreciate if I can get your input on how does this look before we spend a lot of money to kind of change the whole site, and then it doesn't look that beautiful. So with this, I have a question here from Nunya Bidness. Interesting that C19 uses ACE receptors and ACE inhibitors causes bradykinin buildup as a side effect. Absolutely, and that is what we're going to talk about today. So after this, here is the study. And I really loved it that they had, this is not a study, here is the observation. I really loved it that they kind of did a thorough job of finding the genes through the computer, then were able to go over. If you scroll down, you would see that down here, not only they went over all the mechanisms that could explain the clinical symptoms, but then they went over the clinical symptoms that are observed in this disease, and they went over various mechanisms, pathologies because of bradykinin storm that will give rise to those symptoms. So I had a lot to study today, but this was very interesting. So let's start. So here, let's first understand the pathology, the bradykinin system itself. So bradykinin is a protein. It's a small peptide. Remember that protein or amino acids that are lesser than 11 or 9, they're called peptides. And if actually amino acid sequences lesser than 50 are called peptides and greater than 50 are called proteins. It is an inflammatory protein. And it is most of the time released from our body when there is local damage, tissue damage, or when there is local inflammation or immune responses. What it does, so let's say this guy over here is the bradykinin. What it does is it opens up or dilates the arterioles and it constricts the venules. So what does that mean? If I take a detour here, what happens is that arteries, there are large arteries, for example, the artery from the heart is aorta. They start dividing into smaller and smaller branches. And then finally, those branches become really small. And so I'm just going to make one branch over here. This is a small blood vessel with lots of, so arteries have muscles in them, in their wall. So imagine this is an artery with lots of muscle in it. The smallest artery before a capillary is called arteriole. Arteriole. Riole simply means small. So it's a small artery. Then comes the capillary. Capillary is actually, it doesn't have any smooth muscles. It just has a basement membrane and cells on it. So really thin layer of cells. And that thin layer allows various things to get out and come back in. Then the capillaries, they collect together again, and they make, many capillaries collect together and they make something that is called venule. So just like arteriole, a venule is a small vein. Then many venules, they collect together and make a larger vein. Many larger veins collect together and make even larger veins, and so on. So we are talking about this area, arteriole, and this area, venule. And the reason that we are doing this is that this area, the capillary, is very interesting for us in the bradykinin storm. What happens is that bradykinin causes a dilatation of this area, the arteriole. So imagine the blood is coming in through the arteriole and it is getting out through the venule, and between the two is a little filtration system. So when we dilate this part, the input part, the part through which the blood is coming in, that increases the blood flow into the capillary system. On the other hand, when we constrict the venular part, that reduces the outflow. So that causes pressure on the capillaries. So the pressure on the capillary would then allow the capillary, which is acting like a filter, when you put more pressure on it, then it would create more filtration, or more fluids would start getting out. And that is what causes, in general, that is what would cause the buildup of fluids around the capillary. And that is what would cause edema or congestion and the fluid filling in the lungs and other parts of the tissue. This is also responsible, the same mechanism is also responsible for angioedema, which is one of the diseases. We can talk about that later as well. So there is a very interesting comment from Bo K. Dr. Mobeen, bradykinin is stopped with bromelain, pineapple, high-dose lysine treatment for SARS-CoV-2. Dose causes bradykinin cough. They can take bromelain to stop it or reduce the dose. Very good. So thank you very much for that comment. So I hope that this basic mechanism is clear to us, because all the rest of physiology and pathology is going to be hinging on this final result. So now let's go back here. What happens is when bradykinin is produced, and we'll see in a second how it is produced, it would cause the arteriole to become dilated. That would increase the blood flow in the capillary. and it would cause the venule to become constricted. That would put more pressure on the capillary, and more fluids would ooze out of it, and that would cause edema and congestion. Now, how does arteriole become dilated? That means that the smooth muscle of the arteriole is relaxed. How do we relax a muscle? What bradykinin does is it acts on the endothelium. Endothelium is the inner cells of the blood vessels, inner surface cells of the blood vessel. It works on the endothelium and releases nitric oxide from it. Nitric oxide is a very potent vasodilator. It acts on the smooth muscle of the arteriole, the nitric oxide, and causes it to relax. Similarly, it releases the bradykinin, helps release prostacyclin or PGI2, which in turn, when it works on the smooth muscle, also causes the smooth muscle to relax. Thirdly, the endothelium, through the bradykinin's action, also releases endothelial-derived hyperpolarizing factor. What does that mean? So look, what happens is that if this is a muscle cell, it has some electrical charge in it. That is why we call it is polarized. Let's say normally it is at minus 90 millivolt. That means inside is more negative and outside is more positive. If we want this muscle to contract, what we do is we send positive ions inside the muscle, which reduce this negativity, and that is what is called depolarization, and then this muscle will contract. Now, if through some mechanism, instead of sending more sodium in, instead of that, if we could send more negative in, or if we could pull more positives out, either way, if we could just make the inside of the cell more negative, usually by sending in more negatives or pulling out positives from it, then the cell will find it difficult to depolarize, because let's say now it has become minus 130 millivolt. If it has become minus 130 millivolt inside, negativity has increased inside, then making it positive will take more time and more ions to go in, and that might become difficult. So this muscle would now contract less. And this is the stability of the muscle. This is the relaxation of the muscle. So this is the third mechanism, that hyperpolarizing factors are released by the endothelial cells that work on the muscles outside of these cells and cause them to relax. So that is one. On the venule side, the effect is slightly different. Over there, bradykinin causes vasoconstriction by causing the muscle cells to contract. Good. In addition to this, it is a diuretic as well. And actually, the mechanism is still the same. Imagine if this was the kidney urine producing mechanism here. Blood comes in from one side, the urine is filtered out, or the components are filtered out, then the blood goes back. Then out of these components that are filtered out here, we can take back what we need and let the rest go out as urine. So imagine if that is happening and there is more flow of fluid coming in, but there is less flow going out. That would put pressure on the glomerulus over here. The glomerulus is the structure that is taking part in making urine, and more pressure on the glomerulus would cause more urine production as well. So that is a diuretic mechanism. In addition to all of that, it also produces pain. So in the area of inflammation or tissue damage, we have pain as well. So the area swells up, it becomes red, and it is painful. All of that is actually propagated by one part is bradykinin. Bradykinin causes the vasodilatation over there, causes the fluids to accumulate and congest. So that causes hyperemia, or the redness and the swelling. Plus bradykinin also causes the nerve endings to be irritated, and that causes pain. It also can cause allodynia. And allodynia is that pain to a stimulus to which usually the pain does not happen. For example, if I touch my skin, it does not cause pain. But if I go out in sun and I have a sunburn, then if I touch my skin, it would be irritated and I'll feel pain. So this is called allodynia. Allodynia means pain to a stimulus where normally that stimulus doesn't cause pain. And bradykinin causes that as well. So that is the basic mechanism. Now let's look at how the bradykinin is released, who makes bradykinin in our body, and then what is the bigger picture of the bradykinin function. So in our body, mast cells, which are abundant in our lungs, allergies and asthmas are actually, mast cells participate in that, in addition to eosinophils and neutrophils. Mast cells produce bradykinin. Basophils are another type of white blood cells that also produce bradykinin. Gut cells, when they need vasodilatation, when they need gut relaxation, they can also produce bradykinin. And then tissue damaged cells also produce bradykinin. So it comes from immune cells, and it comes from immune or inflammatory cells, plus it comes from the damaged tissue cells as well. So of course, when there is a viral infection like SARS-CoV-2, the local cells are getting damaged, bradykinin is being produced. Now the question is, when the bradykinin is produced, what is the bigger picture? How is it produced? What is happening? So it is a very, very interesting mechanism. Let's start from here. So what happens is, in our tissues that produce bradykinin, there is a protein that is called high molecular weight kininogen or low molecular weight kininogen. These kininogens or kinins are the precursor of bradykinin. These are proteins from which we will make bradykinin. Just like, remember, in angiotensin system, in renin-angiotensin system, we would make angiotensinogen, which will then convert into angiotensin 1, which would then be converted into angiotensin 2, which would then be converted into angiotensin 1 to 7, correct? So in our body, we do this very often, that we take one protein and we modify it, we make it into another protein. Normally, the first stage of the protein is not an active thing, but then when we modify it, we create another protein which is now active. So here, kininogens or kinins are the precursor proteins. They themselves are not active. However, on them, there is another protein called Calicrine that acts on them. It's like a tiny monster or a scissor that acts on these kinins and breaks them down and modifies them into bradykinin. So there are two types of calicrines or enzymes in our body. One that live in our blood, and they are called plasma calicrines. They can take high molecular weight kininogen and convert that into bradykinin. In our tissues, outside of the blood vessels, we also have calicrine, which is called tissue calicrine, that can take light molecular weight kininogen and convert that to calidin. Calidin, in turn, is also operated upon by an enzyme, and it also becomes bradykinin. The end result is that in the presence of calicrine, the kininogens or kinins are converted to bradykinin. This is important for us to keep in mind. Why? Because this guy here, the calicrine, the enzyme that makes bradykinin, we can block this enzyme to reduce the production of the bradykinin, to reduce the bradykinin storm. So this is our main player over here. Now, interesting thing, I think you're going to love this one. This player, Calicrine, this little monster, is inactivated by zinc. It is inactivated by zinc. Yesterday, we talked about hydroxychloroquine, one more mechanism that it causes the suppression of autophagy in neutrophils. So that was a beautiful mechanism by hydroxychloroquine, which also helps further for COVID-19 patients. Here, you're looking at one more mechanism for zinc, that zinc will suppress the activity of calicrine, which would then suppress the production of bradykinin, which would then suppress the bradykinin storm. So zinc, 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 one more thing over here. I love it. And then there is another factor that is a clotting factor number 12. Clotting factor number 12 also activates calicrine. And clotting factor number 12 is inactivated by C1 inhibitor, another protein. So here is the second lever in our hand. If we can suppress, if this is suppressed, the C1 inhibitor, that would cause F12 to become active. Why? Because C1 inhibitor keeps F12 inactive. So if you stop the C1 inhibitor, then F12 will become dysregulated or disinhibited. It would start activating calicrines, which would start making bradykinins, which would cause bradykinin storm. So far so good. Should I move forward? I know that this is a new mechanism. We have been doing immune mechanism and we repeated it so many times that we all have it on our fingertips. This is sort of a new mechanism, but very interesting mechanism to look at. Okay, so now how does this whole thing work together? Bradykinin, as we just talked, helps produce nitric oxide, prostaglandins, prostacyclin, and EDHF, endothelium-derived hyperpolarizing factor. That causes vasodilatation. We just saw this mechanism a few seconds ago. Bradykinin, check this out. You would love it. When bradykinin attaches to ACE receptor, remember ACE that converts angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2? Bradykinin is also operated upon by ACE receptor. This is where the two mechanisms come together. When the ACE receptor acts on bradykinin, it converts it to bradykinin 1 to 5. That is the inactivated form of bradykinin. Just like inactivated form of angiotensin 2 is angiotensin 1 to 7, similarly, inactive form of bradykinin is called bradykinin 1 to 5. And this is done by ACE enzyme, not ACE2, but ACE enzyme. Now here, if we look at the normal angiotensin 1 mechanism that we have been talking about a lot, angiotensin 1 is also operated upon by the ACE enzyme, which converts it into angiotensin 2. And we know that angiotensin 2 is a very potent vasoconstrictor plus pro-inflammatory system. And we know ACE2. Check this one out. This is the ACE2 side. We know that ACE2 enzyme works on angiotensin 2 to convert that into angiotensin 1 to 7, which is vasodilator plus anti-inflammatory. Correct? That is the cytokine storm side of the story. Now what happens is that we have angiotensin 1 to 7 as a vasodilator, we have bradykinin as a vasodilator, and we have angiotensin 2 as a vasoconstrictor. In this study, what they're saying is that they saw the gene expression of bradykinin to be increased, and they saw the gene expression of ACE enzyme to be reduced. What that means is that there are less ACE enzyme to neutralize the bradykinin. So bradykinin is produced more but reduced less or inactivated less. That causes a pileup of bradykinin, which in turn would do the things that we just saw. That is, it would cause arteriolar dilatation and venular constriction, causing more of the fluid to ooze out into the lungs or wherever it is, which would then cause acute respiratory distress syndrome. So that is how bradykinin storm would end up in those symptoms that we have seen before as well. So I hope that this bigger picture is clear. In this bigger picture, something to take away are these two things. Number one, zinc over here. Number two, ACE receptors behavior over here. And number three, the C1 inhibitors behavior over here. These two or three things are important to take away. The result of this mechanism, dysregulated mechanism, is more bradykinin is produced, less angiotensin 2 is produced, which causes bradykinin storm to occur. Now, if we continue, here is what they did in the study. And it is actually a very, very interesting study. I remembered the computer's name. I think I forgot. These are the nation's most powerful computers that they used. So somewhere over here, the computer name is present as well. Let's see. I think this is the computer name. One computer's name is Summit, and the other computer's name is Summit has this, and the other's name is RIA. So two computers, and I love computers. I'm a software engineer as well. So RIA and Summit, two supercomputers took part in this. So what they did was the researchers, they took the fluid from the bronchoalveolar lavage, that is, they took the fluid from the COVID-19 patients. Then they brought those cells and their genetic material to the computers. Computers did an analysis of billions of analyses per second they were performing, and they kept performing that analysis. And here is what the computers found. Here is what they found. Number one, the genes in the cells from the infected patient's lungs. ACE genes, that gene that makes this ACE, this gene was down-regulated. When this was down-regulated, that means less of ACE were produced. That means bradykinin was not becoming inactivated because the inactivation enzyme was not present. That means more bradykinin will be accumulating. When there were down-regulated gene, that caused low ACE enzyme. And another interesting thing, when the ACE enzyme are low in number, then what they do is they prefer to work on bradykinin system more than the angiotensin system. So there is an imbalance in the way the ACE enzyme system works because of the downregulation. That is one. Secondly, the computers found that the gene expression for bradykinin production, that is kinin production, from which bradykinin is formed, is increased. And they also saw that the gene expression for Calicrine is increased. That means the cells were making more of these guys and more of these monsters, which were converting these guys into bradykinin. So the genes were increased that would make this and this. So the result was, of course, there was lots of bradykinin, which would cause lots of inflammatory behavior, which would cause lots of congestion and edema in the lungs. Then they found that the gene for C1 inhibitor is down-regulated. What does that mean? If I go back to this diagram over here, this C1 inhibitor, that keeps F12 in check and does not allow it to activate Calicrine, which would then not make more bradykinin. This gene expression is reduced. When that is reduced, there is less C1 inhibitor. When there is less C1 inhibitor, there is more F12. When there is more F12 active, that causes more activity of Calicrine. When more activity of Calicrine is present, more kinins are created into more bradykinin, and the Bradykinin storm occurs. Very interesting. I love it. I love the mechanisms. So result is that more factor 12 is active, which causes more bradykinin production. We just saw that. Then they also saw that the gene for hyaluronic acid synthase is also increased. What is this? This is a different mechanism. Let me just very quickly explain this. What happens is, in our tissues, cells have genes for making hyaluronic acid. Hyaluronic acids are tissue substances that can attach 1,000 times more weight of water compared to their own weight. So if my weight is 1 kilogram, I can attach 1,000 kilogram of water with me. So what would happen is that if you take a patient, a person, and in their lungs you increase the hyaluronic acid, that means for every gram increase in hyaluronic acid, you will add 1 kilogram of water. And the computers found that the cells had more genes open to make more hyaluronic acid, and they had less gene opens that break the hyaluronic acid. So hyaluronidases means they break hyaluronic acid. Hyaluronidases were less. Hyaluronic acid synthases, which mean they make hyaluronic acid. Syntheses were more, bases were less. That means more hyaluronic acid would accumulate in the lungs. And if it would be accumulated, every gram increase in hyaluronic acid would increase 1 kilogram of water in the lungs. That is also going to cause an issue. So the important thing is that if I make now over here an alveolus, we have done this discussion many times, that alveolus have type 1 pneumocytes and they have type 2 pneumocytes. And then there is some connective tissue outside of the alveolus. Then there is a capillary outside. And what happens is oxygen goes through all of this and enters the RBC hemoglobin, and carbon dioxide from hemoglobin or from blood goes all the way back in here. So this part is called respiratory membrane. This is the tissue through which the gas must traverse to be able to go into the blood or out of the blood. Now what happens is, when we produce more hyaluronic acid, so let's say we produce more hyaluronic acid here, that would cause more water to be accumulated. 1,000 times more water would be accumulated here as well. This hyaluronic acid with water is called hyaluronic gel. Hyaluronic gel. It is not fluid like water, it is gel-like substance. So if you fill a patient's lungs with gel-like substance, then it becomes really difficult for the gases to pass through that gel. And hypoxia occurs, which is a very important symptom of the COVID-19. So this is the interesting discussion for today. What I want to now very quickly go over the study itself. It is a long study, so I'm not going to go over every component. But what is interesting for me is that they connected this mechanism to the clinical outcomes as well. So I'm just going to read a few outcomes here. The virus therefore acts pharmacologically as an ACE inhibitor by reducing the RNA expression more than 10-fold. What does it mean? What they're saying is that this ACE enzyme is downregulated. So that is as good as inhibiting the ACE enzyme, which would then cause ACE2 expression is normally downregulated as well. So angiotensin 2 is catalytic product of ACE. It would seem that the virus's ability to decrease ACE expression would have the effect of upregulating ACE2. So what they're saying is that when ACE is reduced, then ACE2 is upregulated. And we know that there is ACE2 upregulation, which would then cause ACE2 are also receptors for the virus. So that allows more viruses to connect and more viruses to enter the cells. So that is one clinical correlation they are producing. Then over here, if you see, they're saying downregulation of ACE. So this enzyme, downregulation of ACE will result in diversion of renin-angiotensin to produce the BK augmenting peptide angiotensin 1, or more bradykinin is being produced. This would cause pain sensitization and increase intravascular permeability on system-wide level. So patient would feel pain, plus they would have inflammation throughout the body, plus they would have congestion because vessels are dilated and they are more permeable and fluids are accumulating everywhere in the body. That is what we've been seeing for a lot of time. So acute respiratory distress syndrome occurs, septic shock occurs, which means the fluids have exited the blood vessels and blood pressure is low. So this is the second clinical correlation they produced. Then, as mentioned above, the combination of vascular permeability and hyaluronic acid buildup in the lungs can produce a hydrogel that significantly inhibit gas exchange in bronchoalveolar spaces. So that is the discussion that I just did over here, that this hydrogel that is produced will, of course, cause hindrance in gas exchange. In addition, increased levels of vasodilating peptide, APLN, that are produced in COVID-19 patients could have a spillover effect on cardiac function. So vasodilator peptide, so that when the blood vessels are now dilating, that would affect the heart as well. Why? Because the heart has to work more now. So upregulating the expression of ACE2, which in turn will cause cardiac contraction and vasodilatation issues, and that would cause stress on heart. So they're now connecting it to heart as well. Furthermore, excess bradykinin can lead to hypokalemia, which is associated with arrhythmia and sudden cardiac death. When we have less potassium in our body, arrhythmias and even heart failure can occur. Not failure, heart can stop. It is also notable that many of the other symptoms being reported for COVID-19, for example, look at this: myalgia, fatigue, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, anorexia, headache, decreased cognitive functions, are remarkably similar to other hyper-BK bradykinin conditions that lead to vascular hyperpermeabilization, such as angioedema, and was recently noted. So what they're saying is that when in the whole body, blood vessels are dilated and the angioedema is occurring or the congestion is occurring, then all of these symptoms also appear. So anybody who has hyper bradykinin pathology, they show the same symptoms. Then if you go down here, I want us to kind of leave with this discussion over here with this outcome. Not only they have, again, this is a supercomputer based system, so not a study inside a person or in vitro, but they have then proposed some drugs as well to say for bradykinin, here are some drugs that are already available that can help reduce bradykinin behavior. Look at one of them before we look at all of them. Look at this one, vitamin D. I am so proud of our cool beans. We've been working on vitamin D and vitamin C and zinc and those things from a long time. And not even after knowing all these, I didn't know this one. Even then, we were correct in many, many areas. So although I'm going to tell you a little thing, my recent video on one in 3 adults may be at risk of severe COVID-19, that has caused so many cool beans to become so angry with me. Somebody has called me a sellout. Others have said you are on a payroll for WHO or I don't know, CDC. Somebody has said, I never expected you to become such a sellout, and now I'm never going to watch your videos again and never going to share it. So many people have become hurt. That was not my point, to hurt anyone. I very strongly believe at this time, children should not be sent out to schools. My basic comment right from the beginning, 4 months ago, has always been, keep the children at home. We cannot afford their misery. And children are not going to go and run the economy's cycle. They're just going to go and study and come back. Keep them at home. So that was my basic point in there. I am not political here. I am not taking one person's side or another person's side. I don't have any agenda other than focusing on ourselves, the cool beans and our loved ones, to see how can we stay protected. When COVID-19 started, even I was lost. I had no idea what is happening. How do we protect ourselves? So I took up this work to say, let's do this together. That's all. So it is possible that there are some topics I shared that you don't agree with, but that doesn't mean I'm disrespecting you or I've gone and taken money from someone and now I'm manipulating you. That is not what I'm doing. So back here, bradykinin. So there is a drug, there are a few drugs here. So danazol, stanozolol, they reduce bradykinin production. Then icatibant reduces bradykinin signaling. Then ecallantide reduces bradykinin production. Then Berinert, Sunrise, Haggard reduce bradykinin production. Vitamin D reduces renin production. So the whole renin angiotensin system connected to the bradykinin system, it kind of reduces the renin side. Then hyperchromone reduces hyaluronic acid production. Then timbetasine increases fibrinolysis. So it reduces that gel formation. So this is the discussion for today. If you would like, we can go over all of these drugs. And just like Math Plus protocol, we saw their mechanisms. Plus, if you like, I can go more in detail of of the Bradykinin Storm and more detail of the mechanisms, but I wanted today for us to know that there is an alternate theory as well that is out there with the help of a supercomputer. So we should know what it is. And if there is any help from these drugs that we can get, we should get them. I am very happy that we keep using vitamin D. It is helping in so many areas, and zinc, that is helping in so many areas, and hydroxychloroquine, that is helping in so many areas, and ivermectin. So in the beginning, vitamin C, vitamin D, quercetin, zinc, melatonin, ascorbic acid, we've talked about that. Then mostly steroids, if we use them at the right time and aggressively, they can take care of these things. The solution is very, very inexpensive and easy if we target correctly. And now my last couple of comments, and then we'll stop. There was a patient here in California. He had reached out to me, and he wanted me to be on his board for COVID-19 management in case he became sick. And I could not help at this time. I don't practice here in California. But he was saying that whoever he has talked with, whichever doctor, they simply refuse and say, we cannot give it. We are afraid of, some doctors don't believe in it. So that's one group of doctors. Then other groups who may feel that there is something. Not everyone knows the depth of understanding that you and I have been discussing for some time. So our community is different, but not every doctor is clear on these things like this. So even if they have some slight idea that I can use it, they are hesitant to use it for their license issues. So they don't give. So he was very disappointed. Then another person sent me an email today saying that a friend of mine got COVID, and he kept looking for the teachings that you have done, that we need following things, and no doctor was willing to prescribe anything that can help other than saying take Tylenol. And then he found out that he can go somewhere in Los Angeles, if there is a clinic who gives some drugs like this, if they accept that patient, then maybe he can get those drugs. So this person had said to me, he said, please ask Cool Beans. So he had nominated 6 videos out of my videos to say, please ask them to make them more popular so more doctors understand them and are able to prescribe them. So I have never tried to ask you to help me spread the word. But if you are open to it, I would have those 6 videos. We can share them here, and we can share them to as many doctors and nurses and healthcare professionals as possible. So this is the end of the discussion for today. James Kelly, welcome. We have waited for you. I know that your sons were over, so you were not here. But anyways, welcome back. So guys, thank you very much. Cool Beans, thank you very much. Please like, subscribe, and share. The more we can spread the word, if you like what we're talking about, the more we can spread the word, the more lives can be saved. So I am saying this after this person sent me the email. I usually do not ask you to do this because I don't want to look like some slimy salesman asking you to do these things. But if you can share, please share. So see you tomorrow.